There are two types of learners. The first type sees errors as failures, as evidence of inadequacy, as things to avoid, minimize, hide. They practice cautiously, staying in safe territory, protecting their ego from the sting of being wrong. The second type sees errors differently. They see errors as data, as information, as the raw material that drives improvement. They don't avoid mistakes. They generate them deliberately. They study them. They extract every lesson embedded in every failure. And the second type learns exponentially faster. This is error-driven evolution, the mindset and methodology that elite learners use to transform struggle into signal, to redefine failure not as a verdict on their ability but as feedback from reality. They don't just tolerate mistakes, they weaponize them. Let's learn how they do it. Error generation strengthens updating. Most people practice to minimize errors. They want to get everything right. They celebrate sessions where they made no mistakes. But here's the neurological reality. If you're not making errors, your brain isn't updating. Remember prediction error. Your brain only changes when its predictions are wrong, when there's a mismatch between what it expected and what happened. No mismatch, no update. No error, no learning. Elite learners understand this. They don't try to avoid errors. They try to generate them strategically. They push into territory where they're likely to fail. They attempt things just beyond their current ability. They create situations where their predictions will be wrong. Because every error is an update signal. Every mistake is your brain detecting a gap between its current model and reality. And that detection is what triggers plasticity, what drives rewiring. If your practice sessions are error-free, you're not learning, you're performing. Performance is fine for maintaining skill, but it doesn't build new skill. Building requires breaking, failing, discovering the limits of your current understanding so your brain knows what to fix. Error generation strengthens updating. Don't run from mistakes. Run toward them. Deliberately create conditions where you'll fail, because failure is the only thing that forces your brain to evolve. Mistake catalogs beat success logs. Most people keep track of their wins, their breakthroughs, the moments they got it right. They build confidence by reviewing their successes, and there's value in that, but it's not where the learning lives. Elite learners keep mistake catalogs, detailed records of every error they make, what went wrong, why it went wrong, what they were thinking, what they should have done instead. They treat mistakes like precious data, like specimens to study. Because mistakes reveal your mental models. When you make an error, you're not just executing poorly. You're operating on a flawed understanding. And if you can identify that flaw, you can fix it. But if you just move on, if you forget the mistake and focus on the next attempt, the flaw remains. You'll make the same error again. A mistake catalog externalizes your errors. It makes them visible, analyzable. It prevents them from fading into vague memory. And when you review your catalog, patterns emerge. You start to see recurring errors, systematic weaknesses, and those patterns tell you exactly where to focus your practice. Success logs make you feel good. Mistake catalogs make you better, because success confirms what you already know. Mistakes reveal what you need to learn. So start cataloging. After every practice session, write down what went wrong, be specific, be honest. Build a database of failure, and let that database guide your improvement. Failure forecasting sharpens monitoring. Before you attempt something, predict where you're likely to fail, not in a defeatist way, in an analytical way. Based on past patterns, based on your current weaknesses, where is this most likely to break down? This is failure forecasting, and it does something remarkable. It sharpens your internal monitoring. When you've predicted a specific failure mode, you're hyper-aware of it during execution. You're watching for it, and the moment it starts to happen, you catch it. Without forecasting, errors happen and you don't notice them until after. You're surprised. You didn't see it coming. But with forecasting, you're vigilant. You've primed your attention to notice the exact thing you predicted might go wrong. This transforms practice. You're not just executing and hopping for the best. You're executing with targeted awareness. You're monitoring specific failure points. And that monitoring allows you to catch errors earlier, correct them faster, prevent them from becoming ingrained. Failure forecasting also builds meta-awareness. You're thinking about your thinking. You're noticing patterns in your performance. You're developing a model of your own weaknesses. And that model is what allows you to self-correct without needing constant external feedback. So before every practice attempt, pause and forecast. Where will this likely fail? What's the weak link? What should I watch for? Then execute with that awareness active, because failure forecasting sharpens monitoring, and sharp monitoring is how you catch and correct errors in real time. Prediction building beats information intake. We talked about prediction before input, but let's go deeper. The most powerful learning doesn't come from consuming information. It comes from building predictions and testing them against reality. This is the scientific method applied to skill development. You form a hypothesis about how something works. You predict what will happen if you do X, then you test it. And reality either confirms your prediction or corrects it. When reality confirms, you've verified your understanding. When reality corrects, you've discovered something new. Either way, you learn. But you only learn because you made a prediction first. Contrast this with passive information intake. Watching tutorials, reading instructions, taking notes. You're receiving someone else's understanding. It might be correct, but you haven't tested it. You haven't made it yours. It's knowledge, but it's not integrated. Elite learners build predictions constantly. Before watching a demonstration, they predict what they'll see. Before trying a technique, they predict what will happen. Before reading an explanation, they try to explain it themselves first. They turn every learning opportunity into a test of their current model. And every test, whether it succeeds or fails, strengthens their understanding. Success validates, failure corrects, both are learning. So stop passively consuming. Start actively predicting. Make guesses. Form hypotheses. Test them. Let reality be your teacher. Because prediction building beats information intake. It transforms you from a recipient of knowledge into a generator of understanding. Rule compression signals deep integration. When you first learn a skill, the rules are complicated. Step 1, Step 2, remember this, don't forget that. Your head is full of instructions. You're following a checklist. But as you develop mastery, something happens. The rules compress. What used to be 10 separate steps becomes one principle. What used to require conscious attention becomes automatic. The complexity simplifies. This compression is a signal. It tells you that your brain has integrated the skill. It's found the underlying structure. It's moved from conscious execution to unconscious competence. Elite learners track this compression. They periodically try to articulate their understanding in simpler terms. Can I explain this more concisely than last time? Can I reduce 10 rules to 3? Can I find the one core principle that everything else follows from? And when they succeed in compressing, they know they've leveled up. Not because they're performing better necessarily, but because their mental model has become more elegant, more efficient, more deeply integrated. So pay attention to how complex your understanding feels. If a skill still feels like a million moving parts, you're not there yet. Keep practicing. Keep looking for patterns. Keep trying to simplify. Because rule compression signals deep integration. When complexity becomes simplicity, when many becomes one, that's when you know the skill has truly become yours. Early exposure lowers later load. When you encounter something for the first time, your brain has to build the entire framework from scratch. Every concept is new. Every pattern is unfamiliar. The cognitive load is massive. But if you expose yourself to something early, even before you're ready to fully understand it, you're building scaffolding. You're creating initial neural traces. And when you come back to it later when you're ready to learn it properly, the load is lower. The framework exists. You're just filling in details. This is why reading advanced material before you understand it can still be valuable. You're not wasting time. You're preloading. You're giving your brain a preview, and that preview makes the actual learning easier when it happens. Musicians do this. They listen to pieces they'll eventually learn. They're not practicing, just exposing themselves to the sound, the structure, the feel. And when they sit down to learn it, it's already partially familiar. The learning curve is gentler. You can do this deliberately. Before diving deep into a topic, skim it. Watch an overview, get the big picture. Don't worry about understanding everything. Just expose yourself, plant the seeds. Then when you return to actually learn it, those seeds have germinated. The concepts aren't entirely foreign. The cognitive load is lower, and lower load means faster, more efficient learning. Early exposure lowers later load. Preload strategically, and you make the real learning easier. Chunk rehearsal prevents synaptic decay. You build a skill, you practice until it's solid, then you move on to the next thing. And weeks later, when you come back to the first skill, it's degraded. Not gone, but weaker, sloppier. You have to rebuild it. This is synaptic decay. Connections that aren't used weaken over time. Your brain is pruning what seems unnecessary. But there's a simple fix: chunk rehearsal. Periodically revisiting the core chunks of a skill, even briefly, keeps the synapses active, keeps them strong. You're not fully repracticing the skill, you're just touching the key components. Think of it like maintenance. A few minutes here and there to keep the circuits live. You run through the foundational patterns, the critical sequences, the essential movements, not to improve them, just to preserve them. Elite learners schedule this deliberately. They don't just practice new material, they cycle back through old material. They maintain their foundation even as they build higher. And because of this, their skills don't decay. They accumulate. Each new skill sits on top of a stable base. Nothing crumbles, everything stays sharp. So don't just move forward. Build in review cycles. Chunk rehearsal. Brief, focused maintenance of what you've already learned. Because chunk rehearsal prevents synaptic decay. And prevention is easier than reconstruction. Tool reduction reveals true skill. You learn to do something with supports, training wheels, calculators, reference materials, spell check, and you get good at it. But are you good at the skill, or are you good at using the supports? Tool reduction is how you find out. Remove the support. Can you still perform? If yes, the skill is real. If no, you've been leaning. This isn't about making things harder for no reason. It's diagnostic. It reveals dependency. And once you know you're dependent, you can address it. You can practice without the support until the skill stands on its own. Elite learners use tool reduction strategically. They practice with supports to build initial competence, but then they progressively remove them. They test themselves in increasingly bare conditions. No notes, no aids, no safety nets. And if performance holds up, they know the skill is robust. But if it collapses, they know they need to go back and build true independence. So periodically strip away your tools, practice naked, see what breaks needs more work, what holds up is ready for the real world. Tool reduction reveals true skill. Don't hide from it. Use it to test and refine your capabilities. Skill ceilings are usually perceptual. You hit a plateau, you practice and practice, but you stop improving, and you think you've hit your limit, your talent ceiling, the maximum your ability will allow. But here's what's usually true. The ceiling isn't physical or cognitive. It's perceptual. You can't improve because you can't see what needs to improve. Your perception hasn't upgraded. You're blind to the next level. A beginner violinist hears notes as in tune or out of tune. Binary. An expert hears shades of intonation, subtle variations, micro-adjustments. They can perceive differences the beginner can't. and that perceptual ability is what allows them to refine their playing. If you can't perceive the problem, you can't fix the problem. Your actions are limited by your awareness, and when your perception plateaus, your performance plateaus. So when you hit a ceiling, the question isn't, am I talented enough? The question is, what am I not seeing? What are experts noticing that I'm missing? What distinctions do I need to learn to perceive? And you upgrade perception by exposure, by studying expert performance closely, by having experts point out what you can't see yet, by training your senses to notice finer and finer details. Skill ceilings are usually perceptual. Break through by upgrading your ability to see, hear, feel the differences that matter. Once you can perceive them, you can work on them. Constraint escalation builds adaptability. We talked about constraints earlier, but there's a progression, a way to use constraints not just to deepen learning, but to build adaptability. Constraint escalation means progressively increasing the difficulty of the constraints you practice under. First, you master the skill in normal conditions. Then you add one constraint, master it again. Add another, master it again. Each new constraint forces you to adapt, to find new solutions, to build flexibility into your execution. And by the time you've practiced under multiple constraints, the skill has become incredibly robust. It can handle almost any deviation from ideal conditions. Elite performers do this systematically. They don't just practice. They practice under increasingly challenging constraints. Less time, less information, more distraction, more pressure. They escalate until the constraints are absurd. And then when they perform under normal conditions, it feels easy. This is the principle behind overtraining, making practice harder than performance, so that performance, by comparison, is manageable. So escalate your constraints. Start with the skill in its pure form, then add difficulty, then more. Keep pushing until you're operating at the edge of possibility, because constraint escalation builds adaptability, and adaptability is what makes skill transferable, resilient, elite. You now see failure differently, not as something to avoid, but as something to generate, to catalog, to forecast, to mine for data. You understand that errors aren't setbacks, they're updates. They're your brain's mechanism for closing the gap between your current model and reality. Elite learners live here, in the space of productive failure. They don't practice to look good. They practice to discover where they're wrong, and then they fix it, again and again and again. This is error-driven evolution, relentless iteration, constant refinement. Every mistake is information, every failure is feedback, every struggle is signal. You're not avoiding difficulty anymore. You're seeking it. You're creating it. You're using it as the engine of your growth. Because now you know, struggle isn't the obstacle to learning. Struggle is the mechanism of learning. And the people who learn fastest are the ones who have learned to struggle most effectively.